Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I am going to be discussing the books that I liked least in 2024. So 2024 is finished and I read 196 books last year. To be honest, most of them were hits. I really liked a lot of what I read. I think my average rating for the year was somewhere around 3.8. So most of the books were close to a 4-star, but there were a couple books that stood out as books that I really did not enjoy. And the title of this video will probably be my most hated books of 2024. Hate is a strong word. These are just some books that I didn't like or that really didn't live up to the expectations that I had. Also, please excuse the water I'm going to be sipping on. I'm battling a very bad sore throat, but I have a lot of filming to get done today because the library wants their books back. Surprise, surprise. So I have to film videos today. So we're making the best of it. So 196 books, but I just picked a couple that I really didn't like, and I want to go through each of them, and I am open to alternative opinions. So if you have read or have thought about reading any of these books, please put your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. If you like them, I would actually really like to know what you liked about them because I like hearing other opinions. So these were just books that I didn't like, and we're going to talk about them. So the first one is Role-Playing by Kathy Yardley. I've talked about this book quite a bit before, and I think the reason this disappointed me so much was because I had such high expectations going into this book. So I read this as part of my romance reading for Valentine's Day. I try to read some romance books every year, and I also read it for book club. So it was a 2-for-1. And I kind of had high expectations. The individuals in this romance are a little bit older, so I thought they might be a little bit more mature, and it's about two adults who meet on an online game. They discover that they're in the same town, they're both single, and they meet up and romance is going to ensue, of course. But I didn't like this book. I would say the first 25% I was actually invested and things were going as expected, but it quickly fell off for me. I felt like the main female character, Maggie, had really inappropriate boundaries with her son. She was talking to her son about a lot of things that I personally wouldn't talk to my son about. I felt like she crossed a lot of boundaries, in my personal opinion, with meeting up with the guy initially. She just showed up at his house. I felt like the guy had a very interesting family life where his brother was dating his ex. So brother was dating this main character, Otter's guy's ex, and I didn't like that dynamic at all. I just felt like there was a lot that should have been handled differently in both these characters' lives, and I felt like boundaries were inappropriately crossed. I feel like also people talked like they were in medical textbooks. The dialogue became very stilted in a way that I feel like Kathy Yardley, the author, was trying to avoid getting herself in trouble for maybe saying something that wasn't technically accurate or that someone might have a disagreeable opinion with. But when people talk in real life, people say all sorts of things that may not be medically accurate, or maybe the psychologist or sociologist would phrase things differently. But it's okay to not be 100% accurate in a fiction book because that's how people talk. When you have 100% accuracy, then you lose a little bit of the realism that how people actually talk. The one scene that really did it for me was where the main male character Otter was talking about that's his name. It's Aiden. That was his real name. Aiden was talking about how he didn't want to sleep with someone until he had an emotional connection. And the main female character, Maggie, basically read some weird textbook definition that went on for way too long about how people's sexual preferences play. It was just the least likely way anyone in real life would respond to that comment. So nothing about this book felt real. It felt very stilted. It felt like the author was trying to be accurate at the expense of realism. So didn't like this one at all, and I think what made it worse was my high expectations going into the book. I really wanted it to be good, but for me it just didn't do it. So did not like this one, disappointing. Next up, this one I've talked about a lot before, Naughty and Wild. This was another one that I read for my romance reading in February. I could have guessed that I wasn't going to like this. This one circled around to the point where it was so bad it was good because it was funny. It's 2 novellas in one. The first novella was actually erotica, which I like even less than romance. I feel like there wasn't even the intent for plot. There was no plot anywhere to be found. I didn't like it at all. The first was about a finance individual who he winds up he's dating this woman. He finds out the woman he's dating is having an affair with his friend. This is revealed by the family's goddaughter. The family's goddaughter's life has been threatened, and now they need to go live on a houseboat in Tennessee. That's basically all you need to know. Nothing about the plot makes sense. There's a lot of plot holes. It's really easy to figure out the plot and what's happening, and it's mostly just an excuse to read about these two people hooking up over and over and over and over and over. Like an impressive amount of time for 70 pages. It was really impressive. Also, the subtitle here makes me very uncomfortable. We'll just say that. The second one had a little bit more plot. So that was an individual who infiltrates a biker gang to keep an eye on a politician's daughter who joined the biker gang. Politician's daughter joined because her best friend joined, and her best friend joined because her best friend's boyfriend joined. There was plot, so I have to give it that. It says reckless daughter of a Nevada senator, but I really don't think the daughter was reckless. I feel like the daughter's friend was quite reckless, and the daughter was just trying to keep an eye on her. She's hooked up with a rival biker gang in a dangerous move that makes the wild beauty more vulnerable than she imagined. This whole book, though, was just kind of ridiculous, and I didn't like the main character, and I didn't find the main character attractive at all. I assume that's who this guy is supposed to be, but, just didn't do it for me. At least it wasn't erotica, so I have to give it that. But I expected this one to be bad, and it was so bad that it kind of became funny. I can't believe it has a 4.17 rating, but I have to imagine some of that is self-selection. People who like this sort of thing read this sort of thing. People who read this sort of thing are likely to give it a 5 stars, if I had to guess. Oh yes. Yeah, people are rating this quite high. But, well, Megan, I did not enjoy this one. But you know what? You're allowed to. Not for me, but I knew this one wasn't for me. When I Found You by Brenda Novak, this is what I call divorced suburban mom fiction. This is about a woman who, after a divorce from a useless husband, moves across country. She's a destroyed pediatrician, Natasha Gray, divorced, bankrupt, and suddenly a single mom. She's going to start over, and she doesn't need help from Mac Amos, the man who's already broken her heart twice. Of course, she immediately accepts Mac Amos's help, and maybe her kid is actually Max and not her useless husband. And I didn't like it at all. It felt like fantasy. It felt like if your life's not going well, you can read a book like this and, yeah, fantasize about life going a little better for you, but didn't like it. It was kind of boring, honestly. It felt very predictable. And I feel like there was also a super weird scene, if I remember correctly, about how someone was conceived. That was an unbidden memory. I had forgotten that even existed. You know what? We're going to keep that under wraps. We're going to go back to suppressing that. I didn't like it. Didn't like this at all. Next, Murder at Havens Rock by Kelly Armstrong. This was a mystery that I read because I wanted to read a little bit more mysteries that weren't in the cozy category, but this one did not do it for me. So the premise of this book is two individuals, this Casey and her husband Eric Dalton, are going to be building this home that's like a refuge. It's always a refuge for those in need, but it's never really clear about who the people in need are. Anyways, they're building this town off grid, and to do so, they ship in all of these contractors to work on the project. They're like flown in secretly. No one knows where they are, and people start going missing, and there's a dead body that turns up who winds up not being someone who is associated with the project. Didn't like this book at all because I did not like Casey or Eric. I felt like they acted as though the world owed them something, and the world doesn't owe them something. The world doesn't owe them their right. They don't have a right to privacy in the sense that if you're building a town in the middle of the Yukon and people accidentally find that town, you don't have a right to, like, they acted as though they had a God-given right to then scare those people off, even though they didn't, in my opinion. So I didn't like Casey and Eric. Otherwise, the mystery itself was actually kind of interesting, but the main characters were not, and that's what turned it off for me. The next one was a nonfiction one, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Now this one I did rate 3 stars because I like the premise. I like the idea that, it says right here, the average human lifespan is absurdly, insultingly brief. Assuming you live to be 80, you have just over 4,000 weeks. So the idea that most people spend their life doing things that are not important to them is something I agree with, and I think that maybe contemplating for at least 5 minutes of your life, the fact that you are going to have only maybe on average about 4,000 weeks, and what you would like to do with those weeks is a good thing to do. But Oliver Burkeman wound up being way too negative for my current cup of tea. I felt like he was trying to dissuade people from doing anything. I felt like it was written for people who are workaholics. I didn't resonate with this book at all. I liked the message, which is why I got a 3-star, and I think it could work for a lot of people. It just didn't work for me. Flowers for the Sea by Zin E. Rocklin. So this is another one I technically rated 3 stars when I reviewed it, but I would probably rate it lower now. This was sort of a body horror fantasy novella about individuals whose world have flooded and they are now on a sort of arc where they are living. The main character we are following is the only person who has a viable pregnancy and therefore is kind of the hope for the future, but there's definitely body horror elements to it. I don't like body horror. I think if you do, you might enjoy this. There are books, and I think some people can find it cathartic, or writing about these sort of things could be meaningful for people, but there are books where there's just a pervasive sense of negativity, of hopelessness, and this low-grade anger and rage which runs through people's body. And for me personally, I find books like that exhausting. I find that mentality exhausting to hold in life as well. I know people who, and maybe their anger and rage might be held for genuinely good reasons. Like, it's a justifiable reason to be angry at some things that have happened to them. And it's really hard to say this without sounding cruel, but when you hold on to that resentment and that anger and it just seethes in you for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, even when it's justified, it's exhausting. It is exhausting to deal with personally. Other people can sense that on you. And I don't like reading books where I feel like that is the vibe. There's a saying, I don't even know where I heard it. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That was what I felt like this book was like. The main character in this book was horribly mistreated, and of course she has this baby, which gives her a unique position of power, which people in her ship might dislike her for, but the pervasive sense of anger and resentment that just went through the book was kind of exhausting to read, and I truly only finished it because it was only like 100 pages. So, not for me. I think it would have been fine, but the body horror just pushed it over the edge. But if those sort of books, if that kind of energy, for lack of a better term, to get a little woo-woo, that kind of energy in a book doesn't really bother you, or you can read that without personally feeling very affected, and body horror doesn't affect you either, this could be an interesting book. And I do think that the author wrote well, so I would be willing to read something by Zin Rocklin again. And it looks like she's written quite a number of other stuff, so yeah. Next up, High Times in the Low Parliament by Kelly Robson. This was a book that had good promise, but never got going. It's a woman who goes to be a scribe in a parliament which consists of humans and fairies, but is loosely set in like 17 or 1800 England, but like fantasy. Very interesting. I don't think there were any men in the book, and I realized partway through that we hadn't mentioned a male character, and then by the end we hadn't mentioned anybody. So I don't know if this world was also entirely female. I feel like it could be. The main character, Lana Baker, it has a very complicated love life, but I did not like this book. I felt like it went nowhere. Nothing was really happening, and at the end she wound up in some sort of throuple situation. Nothing about this intrigued me. Again, I only finished it because it was under 200 pages, and by the time I realized it was going nowhere, I was almost at the end. So, I feel like there was also a threat of annihilation in this book that never really felt real. So I felt like the stakes didn't feel real. Finally, Mathematics, a very short introduction by Timothy Gowers. I love math. I read about math a lot for fun. My degree was in math, but this book is in what I would call audience purgatory. So this book is supposed to be an introduction to the topic, but the author went way too deep on the variety of topics covered to be accessible in any manner to a true beginner, to someone who truly has no background in mathematics. There are infinitely many more books that do the topic much better for people with no interest, no desire, or no background, or who have been out of the school system for a while. So this book did not introduce it sufficiently for them. However, the concepts were general enough and nothing was truly uniquely presented in such a way to intrigue someone who has more of a background, someone like myself who has studied mathematics at the college level. So for me, this was rather boring and dull and didn't bring anything new to the table because it was just a recitation of things that we already know about. And this is coming from someone who also truly enjoys reading those books for beginners, because usually authors try to approach topics in a new and unique way, and that's one of the reasons I love reading even introductory introductory books on mathematics. This one though, it didn't fit the beginners, it didn't fit people who had any knowledge, it was in this purgatory situation, and I didn't like it at all. So this was unfortunately a 2-star, which is pretty low for a math book for me, and I did not like this one at all. So let me know what you read in 2024. Which books did you read? Did you like all of them? Which ones did you not like? Did you read any of these, or do you have any thoughts on these? Please let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.